There is one more thing that we have to talk about before we wrap up our discussion of analyzing argument structure in terms of premises and conclusions, and that's subsidiary conclusions. Some arguments, unfortunately, are not as simple as just having one conclusion with a bunch of premises supporting them. Sometimes you have two conclusions within an argument, even these short little arguments that we see in logical reasoning. And when you get that situation, you need to decide which one is the main conclusion and which one is what we call a subsidiary conclusion that acts as a premise and supports that main conclusion. So we've been taught to think of arguments as a hierarchy, right? And our normal structure is a conclusion with some premises down there supporting it. You know, a typical argument on the LSAT might have 2 or 3 premises down below. But sometimes you see a slightly more complex structure where there might be a main conclusion, but below it is another conclusion that itself receives support, right, from its own set of premises. And talking about this conclusion, although it's labeled as a conclusion, is still also a premise as well when considered vis-a-vis the main conclusion of the argument. So there will be a support relationship still flowing towards this main premise. And between these two, you can test that support relationship the same way we've learned to do with the therefore test. So if you have two things that look like conclusions, they're getting support from some premises of their own, and you're trying to figure out which one is the main conclusion, well, the subsidiary one is going to support the main conclusion. So when you test these two, it's going to sound correct, it's going to sound natural when you have the subsidiary here in this spot that was the premise spot on our test strip when we're doing the therefore test, and the main conclusion in the main conclusion spot. If you reverse them, it's going to sound wrong. So once you have it right and you know it sounds good in this order here, then you can be sure this is the main conclusion and it's getting support from the subsidiary conclusion. Looking at subsidiary conclusions gets pretty complicated pretty quickly, so we want to go through this very, very slowly in the text lesson. Just think of this video as a little introduction to that, and we'll carefully go through an actual example with a subsidiary conclusion together.